In the twilight of the myths that envelop antiquity, Rome emerges as a city whose identity is forged in the tension between historical reality and legend. Its origins are not merely a narrative of dates and chronologies, but a mosaic of symbols that projected the ambitions and values of a people who sought to legitimize themselves as heirs of the gods and masters of their own destiny. Before there were emperors, disciplined armies, and vast territories under their command, Rome was conceived in the collective imagination as the work of abandoned heroes, rescued by nature and destined for greatness. The legend of Romulus and Remus constitutes the foundational core of Roman imperial identity. According to the tradition transmitted by Titus Livius and other chroniclers, the twins were sons of the Vestal Rhea Silvia and the god Mars. Their birth was marked by tragedy. King Amulius, fearful of losing power, ordered them to be abandoned in the waters of the Tiber River. Fate, however, prevailed over the sentence. A she-wolf, symbol of strength and fertility, nursed them in a cave of the Palatine known as the Lupercal, until a shepherd, Faustulus, found them and raised them as his own. As adults, the twins decided to found a new city in the place where they had been rescued. The rivalry over which hill should be the center of the settlement, the Palatine for Romulus, the Aventine for Remus, led to a fatal confrontation. Romulus killed his brother and, according to tradition, proclaimed, "So perish anyone who crosses my walls." With this bloody act, the destiny of Rome was sealed, whose name would derive from its first king. The 7 kings who, according to tradition, ruled Rome before the Republic represent the transition between myth and reality. Among them stand out figures such as Numa Pompilius, who is said to have given the Romans their first religious institutions, and Tarquinius Priscus, the Etruscan king credited with introducing symbols of power and political practices that would survive for centuries. The accounts also mention monumental works such as the Cloaca Maxima, a drainage system that still today recalls the organizational capacity of those primitive times. However, archaeology has shown that beneath these narratives lies a real process, the slow fusion of scattered villages around the hills of the Tiber into a single urban nucleus, influenced by neighboring peoples such as the Etruscans and the Latins. The Etruscans, in particular, played a crucial role in the early shaping of Rome. Their influence can be seen in architecture, religious rites, and political organization. The use of the arch, the rituals of divination, and the symbols of authority, such as the fasces, have their origin in this culture of central Italy. The last of the kings, Tarquinius Superbus, embodies the end of this foundational cycle. His tyrannical rule, according to tradition, unleashed the rebellion that culminated in the expulsion of the monarchy in the year 509 BC and the beginning of the Republic. The story of his fall is marked by the episode of Lucretia, a Roman matron who, after being violated by Sextus Tarquinius, the king's son, took her own life, provoking the indignation of the people and the uprising led by Lucius Junius Brutus. This event, although also enveloped in a legendary aura, functioned as a political myth. The Republic was born in opposition to tyranny and under the ideal of defending civic virtue. The foundational myth was not just a story told to children or remembered in festivals, it was an active part of Roman politics and identity. Generals, senators, and emperors constantly invoked Romulus as a model founder and warrior. Augustus, the first emperor, presented himself as a new Romulus, guarantor of a rebirth that projected imperial Rome towards eternity. Even in times of decadence, the memory of the origins served as a reminder that the city had been born under the protection of the gods and was destined to endure. Archaeology has confirmed certain elements that fit with the tradition. Excavations on the Palatine have revealed remains of huts from the Archaic period, dated around the 8th century BC, which coincides with the chronology attributed by legend to the founding of the city in the year 753 BC. Likewise, vestiges of primitive walls and drainage systems have been found, suggesting early organization and the intention to consolidate an urban nucleus in that period. Although it is impossible to prove the real existence of Romulus, the material evidence supports the idea that a process of unification and growth was taking place in that region. After the creation of Rome, the small settlement that arose around the hills of the Tiber began a long process of transformation that would take it from its humble origins to become the heart of one of the most powerful empires in history. At the beginning, the city was organized under monarchy, where the legendary kings established the first political, religious, and social institutions that would shape the course of its identity. However, with the expulsion of Tarquinius Superbus and the birth of the Republic in the year 509 BC, Rome took a decisive turn. Power ceased to be concentrated in a single figure and was distributed among consuls, senators, and magistrates, creating a system that sought balance and civic participation. During the following centuries, the Republic was consolidated thanks to its military capacity and its diplomatic skill. Rome faced wars against neighboring peoples, such as the Etruscans, Sabines, and Latins, and later against the Samnites until it achieved control of the entire Italian peninsula. With the Punic Wars, the confrontation with Carthage extended its influence to the western Mediterranean, and later the campaigns in Greece and Asia Minor projected it as a power in the east. However, growth also brought internal tensions, social inequalities, struggles between patricians and plebeians, and political crises that culminated in the civil wars of the last century of the Republic. It was then that figures such as Julius Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus marked a new direction, until the rise of Octavian, later known as Augustus, sealed the end of the Republic and the beginning of the Principate. Under Augustus, Rome reached an unprecedented balance: political stability, administrative reforms, territorial expansion, and cultural flourishing that inaugurated the so-called Pax Romana. Thus, from that myth of Romulus and Remus to the rule of the emperors, Rome passed from being a city born of legends to becoming an empire that dominated seas, lands, and cultures. The Roman social structure. The true backbone of Roman civilization lay in its complex social structure, a network of hierarchies and bonds that determined the destiny of each individual from the moment of birth. The Eternal City was built upon a society where blood, wealth, and legal status defined privileges and limitations, but at the same time offered a surprising capacity for mobility and transformation. At the top of this social pyramid were the patricians, descendants of the oldest families of Rome. According to tradition, they were the direct heirs of the first senators appointed by Romulus, known as patres. Their lineage granted prestige and exclusive rights in the early times of the Republic. They controlled the main priestly, military, and political offices, monopolizing decision-making in the Senate. The patricians were, in essence, the aristocracy of Rome, identified not only by their wealth but also by the symbolic prestige that emanated from belonging to a founding lineage. The notion of nobilitas was consolidated with them, extending the idea that ruling was a duty passed down from generation to generation. Below them were the plebeians, a broad and diverse category that included artisans, peasants, merchants, and citizens without noble lineage. Although in the first centuries of the Republic they lacked access to the highest offices and were relegated in the political system, they represented the vast majority of the population and, over time, became the vital force of Rome. The tensions between patricians and plebeians gave rise to a prolonged social conflict known as the struggle of the orders. It was in this context that the plebeians began to organize, creating their own institutions such as the tribunate of the plebs in the 5th century BC, a magistracy that granted them the power of veto against senatorial decisions. Thanks to these struggles, they managed to win fundamental rights, including access to the consulship and the drafting of laws that recognized their position within the Republic. Between the two groups, the social distance was gradually reduced as Rome expanded its territories. Contact with other cultures, the accumulation of wealth, and the need for citizen soldiers in the legions meant that wealthy plebeians sometimes reached a level of influence comparable to that of the patricians. From this fusion arose the Roman Republican nobility, a mixed body of both patrician and wealthy plebeian families who shared political power. Nevertheless, the original distinction never entirely disappeared, and in social customs, marriages, and ancestral prestige, the title of patrician remained a powerful symbol. Below patrician and plebeian citizens, Rome had a vast mass of individuals who did not enjoy political rights, the slaves. They constituted the hidden foundation of Roman economic power. Their number grew vertiginously after the great conquests of the 3rd and 2nd centuries BC, especially after the Punic Wars and the expansion into Greece and Asia Minor. Captured in battles, sold for debts, or born within patrician households, slaves carried out tasks ranging from working in the fields and mines to domestic, administrative, or even intellectual work. Some were teachers, accountants, or doctors, showing that slavery in Rome was not limited to physical labor. Although deprived of freedom and without legal rights, slaves were considered property, but they could also accumulate a peculium, a small personal fund of money, and, in certain cases, buy their freedom. The condition of freedman became a particular social category. When a slave obtained manumission, whether as a reward, by purchase, or by testamentary disposition, he became a freedman. He did not enjoy all the privileges of a free-born citizen, but he did acquire a status superior to that of slaves. Freedmen usually maintained ties of dependence with their former masters, but they could also prosper as merchants, artisans, or entrepreneurs. In fact, many freedmen accumulated significant fortunes in imperial times, even reaching positions of influence in palace administration. Their social ascent symbolized the flexibility of the Roman system, capable of absorbing and transforming even those who had once been enslaved. Citizenship was another fundamental axis of Roman social structure. To be a Roman citizen granted rights and duties, to participate in politics, to be protected by the laws, to contract legitimate marriage, and to serve in the legions. During the first centuries, this condition was restricted to the inhabitants of Rome and its surroundings, but with territorial expansion, it gradually spread. After the Social War in 91 to 88 BC, citizenship was granted to all the peoples of Italy, and over time, emperors such as Caracalla extended it to almost all the free inhabitants of the empire through the Constitutio Antoniniana of the year 212 AD. Citizenship became an instrument of integration, uniting under a single legal framework millions of people of different origins, religions, and cultures. Within this social network were also the clients, a key figure in personal and political relations. Clients were free men, mostly plebeians or freedmen, who depended on a patron, usually a patrician or influential citizen, for protection, favors, or economic support. In return, they offered loyalty and services, such as accompanying their patron in public or supporting him in votes. This client system created a network of ties that structured political life and reinforced social hierarchy, showing how even free citizens could become trapped in relationships of dependence. Social mobility, though difficult, was not impossible in Rome. A plebeian could rise thanks to wealth or military service, a slave could become a freedman and prosper, and a freedman could pass fortune and prestige to his children, who would then be full citizens. In this sense, Roman society combined rigidity and flexibility. It was marked by barriers of birth and status, but offered paths to climb positions through merit, ambition, or fortune. The weight of honor and reputation was another distinctive feature. It was not only about occupying a place in the hierarchy, but about publicly demonstrating the dignity and virtue associated with that position. Patricians were obliged to exhibit their nobility through magistracies and public works. Wealthy plebeians had to sustain their influence through generosity towards the community, and enriched freedmen were viewed with suspicion if they wielded too much power. Roman society was a permanent representation of status, where every gesture and every space served as a stage of social visibility. Daily life in the city Rome was not only an empire forged through conquests, nor a monumental city of marble and columns. It was, above all, a city inhabited by hundreds of thousands of men, women, children, and slaves who day after day lived their existence between the routine, the bustle, and the contradictions of a metropolis in constant transformation. Daily life in Rome was a reflection of its social hierarchies, of its contrasts between wealth and misery, and of an urban organization that offered both splendor and precariousness. Housing was the starting point of these differences. In the city center and in the wealthiest neighborhoods, patricians and rich citizens lived in domus, spacious houses organized around a central atrium open to the sky where a small pool or impluvium was usually placed to collect rainwater. These residences had mosaics, frescoes, and differentiated rooms. The tablinum as a reception hall, the triclinium for banquets, and interior gardens that displayed the wealth of their owners. The domus was not only a private space, but also a public stage where the paterfamilias received his clients and exercised his political role. In contrast, most of the population lived in insulae, multi-story buildings made of more modest materials such as brick and wood. These apartment blocks, often overcrowded and of poor quality, were prone to fires and collapses. Entire families crowded into narrow rooms without direct access to running water, forced to rely on public fountains or to buy water carried by slaves. Food supply was another essential element of urban life. Rome had markets distributed throughout the city and, above all, the great Forum Boarium, the center of food exchange. Wheat, the basis of the diet, arrived in colossal quantities from Sicily, Africa, and Egypt, and was distributed to the plebs in the form of free or subsidized rations, a system known as annona that ensured the sustenance of the lower classes and prevented riots. Bread and olive oil constituted the daily food of much of the population, accompanied by legumes, seasonal fruits, and watered-down wine. Meat was a luxury reserved for the wealthiest or for festive occasions, while salted fish, olives, and cheese were consumed more frequently. Taverns and street stalls offered quick and cheap meals to those who had no kitchen in their homes, which was common in the insulae. Markets were meeting points as important as the political forum or the amphitheatre. There the cries of vendors, the smells of spices brought from the east, and the disputes over the price of goods mixed together. From basic products to luxury items could be found there, fabrics dyed with Tyrian purple, perfumes, bronze tableware, and slaves for sale. The market was indeed a mirror of the empire's diversity, since what was offered in Rome came from all corners of its conquered territories. Life in the neighborhoods clearly displayed the inequality of the city. On the Palatine Hill lived the wealthiest, surrounded by gardens and palaces, while in the Subura, a popular and densely populated neighborhood, artisan workshops, taverns, and unhealthy housing predominated. Coexistence was chaotic, narrow streets crowded with carts and pedestrians, street vendors, improvised shows, and, at times, crime and prostitution. However, within this vibrant mixture arose the essence of Rome as a cosmopolitan city, where class differences intersected at every corner and where public life had a protagonism that few ancient cities shared. Free time was also part of daily life. Beyond the great spectacles of the circus and the amphitheatre, Romans filled their days with simple activities, visiting the baths, attending theatrical performances, participating in religious festivals, or conversing in the forum. The street was a living space where political rumors, news of distant wars, and Senate intrigues spread quickly. Processions, military parades, and funerals of illustrious figures were collective spectacles that reinforced the shared identity of the citizens. Leisure and politics blended, for the average Roman found in public life not only entertainment but also a sense of belonging. Hygiene and sanitation were marked by urban infrastructure. The aqueduct system ensured a constant supply of water that reached public fountains, baths, and privileged homes. However, sanitation was unequal. Although sewers such as the Cloaca Maxima existed, the streets were often unhealthy and waste was frequently thrown from the windows of the insulae. Odors, noise, and dust were inseparable parts of the urban landscape, accompanied by the constant presence of pack animals, stray dogs, and flocks of birds in the markets. Religious festivals marked the urban calendar. Processions, sacrifices, games, and public banquets interrupted routine and filled the streets with music and color. The Roman people lived surrounded by divine signs, altars in houses, temples in each neighborhood, and protective gods of specific activities, from commerce to harvest. Daily life was permeated by superstitions and rituals, in which the everyday and the sacred intertwined without interruption. Constant noise was another inseparable feature of urban Rome. Carts circulating at restricted hours, blacksmiths' hammers striking metal, vendors announcing their products, and crowds gathered in forums and markets made the city a place where silence was almost impossible. The testimonies of authors such as Juvenal and Martial reflect the incessant bustle that marked the pulse of the empire's capital. The role of the family. But the Roman scheme was seen both in the city and in the houses of its citizens. Under the roof of each Roman home, the tensions between power and obedience, between tradition and renewal, between duty and ambition were reproduced on a small scale. The concept of family was imbued with legality, religion, and politics, which turned each house into a stage of absolute authority and the transmission of customs. At the heart of this model was the patria potestas, the legal and moral power exercised by the paterfamilias over all members of his household. This power was unlimited. It included the life and death of the children, the disposition of family property, the decision on marriages, and the possibility of selling descendants as slaves. Although in practice this absolute control was rarely exercised in its most extreme forms, the mere existence of patria potestas reminded every member of the household that their life was subordinated to the paternal figure. The paterfamilias was not only the domestic head, but also priest, judge, and representative of the family before society and the state. His authority was seen as a pillar of stability, ensuring that discipline and obedience were transmitted from generation to generation. Marriage in Rome had a profoundly social and political character. It was not merely an emotional union, but an institution regulated by customs and laws designed to ensure the continuity of the family and strengthen alliances between clans. There were various forms of marriage, among them the cum manu, in which the wife came under the authority of her husband and became fully integrated into his family, and the sine manu, more common in the late Republic, where the woman remained legally tied to her family of origin, keeping her property and a certain independence. The dowry played a central role in these unions, constituting economic security for the wife and a symbol of prestige for the husband. The choice of spouse was not generally a personal decision, but the result of family agreements that sought to reinforce social or political positions. Even in the intimacy of the home, marriage functioned as a gear within the wider mechanism of Roman society. The education of children began from the earliest years within the family. Mothers, assisted by nurses and slave women, were in charge of initial care and instilling the first rules of conduct. The father, however, had the final word in moral and civic education. Children were taught to respect the gods, obey authority, and value sacrifice for the benefit of the community. The figure of the paterfamilias was also a model to imitate, an example of discipline, rectitude, and religious devotion. For boys, the goal was to become active citizens, prepared for public or military life. For girls, the goal was to learn domestic virtues such as modesty, fidelity, and the ability to manage the household. From the age of 7, children of wealthy families could be sent to private schools, where they learned reading, writing, and arithmetic under the guidance of a ludi magister. Later, the sons of citizens with political or legal ambitions were trained in rhetoric, a discipline considered indispensable for participation in public life. Authors such as Cicero bear witness to this tradition in which speech became a political weapon. Education was not universal. Poor families lacked the resources to send their children to teachers, so most learned practical trades by working from an early age. Educated slaves, particularly those of Greek origin, played a crucial role as tutors and pedagogues in aristocratic households, contributing to the transmission of Hellenic culture within Rome. The relationship between parents and children was regulated not only by the patria potestas, but also by the cult of the ancestors. The Romans venerated their elders through the lares and penates, domestic deities who protected the home. In family festivities, wax portraits of ancestors were displayed in processions, reminding each new generation that their identity was linked to a chain of lineages. The education of children included the transmission of this memory, instilling in them the obligation to honor the family name and extend its prestige. The family, in this way, was not only a practical unit but a bridge between the dead, the living, and those yet to be born. The role of women within the family was defined by tradition, although with nuances. The wife had the duty of managing the household, supervising domestic slaves, and ensuring the early education of the children. Her influence, however, could be considerable in the private sphere. She advised her husband, took part in decisions regarding marriages, and in some cases managed her own property. While formal authority rested with the paterfamilias, reality showed that many women exercised indirect power, both in family economy and in social life. Roman morality idealized the figure of the matron as a symbol of virtue and honor, while severely condemning any conduct considered improper. Birth and child-rearing were surrounded by rituals and decisions that reflected the harshness of Roman society. After childbirth, the newborn was placed at the father's feet, who decided whether to accept or reject it. In case of rejection, the fate could be exposure in a public place, where the child was abandoned, sometimes taken in by other families or turned into a slave. This practice, although shocking to the contemporary eye, reveals to what extent the survival of the infant depended on the will and judgment of the paterfamilias. Acceptance implied integration into the family community, and with it incorporation into the social and religious life of Rome. The Roman army. If politics and institutions shaped Rome's identity, it was the army that carved its borders and ensured its permanence. From its earliest struggles against neighboring peoples to the campaigns that extended the empire from Britain to Mesopotamia, the Roman legions were the decisive instrument of expansion and control. Discipline, tactical innovations, and the ability to absorb resources and men from conquered territories made the Roman army one of the most formidable in ancient history. Military discipline was the cornerstone of Roman power. The life of the legionary was governed by strict rules, where absolute obedience was the basis of order. Punishments were harsh. Disobedience, cowardice, or desertion could be punished with flogging, loss of pay, or even with the decimatio, a collective punishment in which 1 out of every 10 men was executed by lot. At the same time, rewards were clear: spoils of war, land grants upon discharge, and the social prestige of having served under the Roman eagles. This balance between punishment and reward created an army committed to victory and willing to endure the harshest conditions. Training forged resilient bodies and minds accustomed to sacrifice. Recruits practiced marches of up to 20 miles carrying full equipment, exercises with wooden weapons heavier than the real ones, and the construction of fortified camps at the end of each day. Discipline was not limited to combat, it also encompassed engineering, logistics, and organization. A Roman army could build a bridge, dig trenches, or fortify a camp in a matter of hours, demonstrating that for them war was both a science and an art. Weapons and equipment reflected this pragmatic mentality. The legionary was equipped with the gladius, a short double-edged sword ideal for close combat; the pugio, a small dagger; the pilum, a throwing spear designed to bend upon impact and disable the enemy's shield; and the scutum, a large rectangular shield that protected the soldier in tight formation. The helmet, galea, and armor, which evolved from chainmail to the lorica segmentata of metal plates, completed the panoply. This equipment was not only effective on the battlefield, but also a symbol of belonging to an organized war machine in which each soldier was part of a collective mechanism. The battle order of the legions was carefully structured. An imperial legion numbered about 5,000 to 6,000 men, divided into cohorts, centuries, and maniples. Each century was led by a centurion, a key figure whose practical authority sometimes surpassed that of the tribunes themselves. The standard of the legion, the silver or gold eagle, was the symbolic heart of the unit. Losing it was equivalent to an insurmountable disgrace. Formations such as the famous testudo, where soldiers interlocked their shields to form an impenetrable shell, demonstrate the combination of discipline and creativity that characterized the legions. The Roman army also drew on allies and auxiliary troops. These contingents, recruited from conquered peoples, contributed cavalry, archers, slingers, and specialized warriors who complemented the heavy legionary infantry. Thus, Spaniards skilled with the falcata, Numidians with their light cavalry, or Syrians with their composite bows enriched the tactical diversity of the army. After years of service, many auxiliaries obtained Roman citizenship, which made war a channel of cultural and political integration. Military campaigns were the engine of Roman expansion. In the early centuries, wars against Etruscans, Latins, and Samnites consolidated control of the Italian peninsula. Later, the Punic Wars against Carthage pitted Rome against an enemy capable of threatening its survival. The victory over Hannibal and the destruction of Carthage in 146 BC marked the beginning of Mediterranean supremacy. In the east, campaigns against Macedonia and the Hellenistic kingdoms incorporated Greece and Asia Minor, while in the west, the conquest of Hispania dragged on for centuries of local resistance. Each victory not only expanded territories, but multiplied the number of slaves, resources, and wealth that fed the Eternal City. The army was not only an instrument of conquest, but also of imperial construction. Wherever the legions marched, they left behind roads, bridges, and fortifications. Military roads not only served to move troops quickly, but became arteries of trade and communication that united the empire. Temporary camps, organized with geometric precision, often became permanent colonies that gave rise to new cities. The Roman soldier was not only a warrior, he was also an engineer, builder, and colonizer. The figure of the general acquired a decisive role in this system. In the Republic, consuls and proconsuls led the legions, but military success could translate into excessive political ambitions. Marius and Sulla, in the 1st century BC, showed how the army could become a tool of personal power. Julius Caesar pushed this process to the limit. His campaigns in Gaul not only extended Rome's borders but cemented his prestige as an undisputed leader. The crossing of the Rubicon in 49 BC, when he defied the Senate's authority by entering Italy with his troops, symbolizes the army's transformative power in Roman politics. Under the empire, generals continued to play a key role, but their authority was subordinated to the emperor, supreme commander of all legions. The Roman army was also a stage for rebellions and crises. Harsh discipline did not prevent mutinies when soldiers felt underpaid or used in endless campaigns. The civil wars of the 1st century BC and the military uprisings of the imperial period show that the legions could be as dangerous to Rome as to its enemies. Emperors were proclaimed or deposed by the will of the soldiers, which gave the army a latent political power that often manifested in moments of institutional weakness. The cultural and psychological impact of the army on Rome was profound. For the citizen, serving in the legions was an honor and a path to glory or prosperity. For the subjugated peoples, seeing the legions arrive meant facing an almost invincible machine. The fear inspired by the Roman standards was mixed with admiration for their organization and efficiency. The reputation of invulnerability accompanied Rome for centuries, until defeats in places such as Teutoburg in the year 9 AD reminded that no force was eternal. In the last centuries of the empire, the army underwent profound transformations. Recruitment increasingly opened to barbarian peoples who provided entire contingents of federates. Loyalty to the emperor became fragile and traditional discipline eroded. The force that had forged a vast empire began to fragment, unable to contain the invasions that eventually overwhelmed its borders. The Roman Colosseum and the law of bread and circus. No other ancient civilization made entertainment such a central axis of its collective identity as Rome. The Romans lived and died in the public stages of their city, from the amphitheaters where the clash of steel resounded to the circuses where the crowd roared at the passing of the horses. Leisure was not a mere pastime. It was a mechanism of social control, an affirmation of power, and a reflection of the brutality and refinement that coexisted in Roman culture. Gladiators became the most famous protagonists of this theater of blood. They were, for the most part, slaves, prisoners of war, or condemned criminals, although there were also free men who, attracted by glory or economic necessity, voluntarily offered themselves to fight. Trained in special schools known as ludi, they lived under strict discipline and were instructed by expert veterans called doctores. Each gladiator specialized in a type of combat and carried distinctive weaponry: the retiarius with his net and trident, the secutor with his smooth helmet and short sword, the mamillo with a heavy shield and decorated helmet, or the Thracian with his curved dagger. These categories were not arbitrary. They were designed to offer spectacular duels in which each style had strengths and weaknesses against another, as if on a bloody chessboard. The Flavian amphitheater, known as the Colosseum, was the epicenter of these fights. Inaugurated in the year 80 AD under Emperor Titus, it could hold more than 50,000 spectators, distributed in stands that precisely reflected the social hierarchy. In the seats closest to the arena sat senators and magistrates. In the upper levels, the plebs, and at the very top, standing women and slaves. The architectural design allowed a clear view from any point, and the internal machinery, with passageways, elevators, and trapdoors, made possible the sudden appearance of animals or gladiators, increasing the spectacle. In the arena, life and death were decided under the gaze of the emperor and the people, who could approve or condemn the fallen fighter with the gesture of the thumb. The gladiatorial games were not only a spectacle of violence but also a political instrument. Emperors and magistrates organized them to gain popularity and ensure the loyalty of the people. Panem et circenses, that is, bread and circus, summed up the strategy. As long as the population received food and entertainment, it remained calm, away from intrigues and political tensions. In this sense, the spectacle was a means of cohesion and control, a constant reminder of the power of those who governed. Death in the arena was laden with symbolism. The gladiator who fell was not just a defeated man, but an actor in a public ritual where blood affirmed the superiority of Rome over its enemies and over fate itself. However, not all combats ended in death. Many gladiators were too valuable to be sacrificed in each fight, and surrender could be accepted if the public and the organizer of the games approved it. Over time, some gladiators achieved fame comparable to that of heroes, with followers who celebrated their victories and mourned their defeats. Names such as Spartacus, who led a slave rebellion in the 1st century BC, transcended even the realm of spectacle to become symbols of defiance against Roman power. Alongside the amphitheaters, the circuses were another monumental stage of popular entertainment. The Circus Maximus, with capacity for more than 200,000 spectators, was the most magnificent of all. There, chariot races were held, one of the most exciting entertainments for the Romans. The aurigi, driving chariots pulled by 4 horses, risked their lives in sharp turns, collisions, and overturns that unleashed the roar of the crowd. The factions, identified by colors, aroused passions comparable to those of modern sports teams, dividing citizens into rival groups that could even result in violent clashes. Betting was frequent, and the fortune of a victorious auriga could rival that of a senator. The circus, more than a spectacle, was a mass phenomenon that both united and divided, showing how popular fervor could overflow the limits of politics. Other public shows were not lacking to complete the leisure offer. Hunts of exotic animals called venationes presented beasts in the arena brought from the ends of the empire: lions, tigers, elephants, or crocodiles. These combats displayed Rome's domination over nature and reinforced the idea that no force, neither human nor animal, could resist Roman power. Public executions of criminals were also held, in which the condemned were exposed to beasts or forced to reenact myths in which their real death completed the drama. The spectacle was, in this sense, a fusion of theatre, religion, and violence. The Roman baths. Few institutions reflected the collective spirit of Rome better than the baths. More than simple public baths, they were the heart of social life, spaces where hygiene mixed with leisure, business, and politics. In a bustling and densely populated city, the baths offered daily respite, a setting where patricians and plebeians could meet in the same environment, united by hot water and shared routine. The first facilities of this kind were modest, but over time they transformed into monumental complexes financed by emperors and magistrates. Baths, such as those of Caracalla or Diocletian, reached colossal dimensions, capable of accommodating thousands of visitors at the same time. Built in marble, adorned with mosaics and sculptures, they included bath halls, gyms, libraries, gardens, and even theatres. Their magnificence was a reflection of Rome's power and of its rulers' desire to win the people's favour through public works. The bathing circuit was a carefully designed experience. The visitor began in the apoditerium, the dressing room where he left his clothes under the watch of slaves. From there he passed to the frigidarium, a cold water hall that invigorated the body. He then moved on to the tepidarium, of moderate temperature, which prepared him for the intense heat of the caldarium, a space with hot pools and steam heated by an underground system known as the hypocaust. This ingenious mechanism distributed hot air beneath the floors and through the walls, showing the sophistication of Roman engineering. Finally, some ended in the palestra, an area for physical exercise, or in the laconicum, a kind of dry sauna. The route combined pleasure and health, following an order that sought to purify the body and revitalize the spirit. Access to the baths was surprisingly democratic. Although there were different schedules for men and women, and in some cases separate facilities, the cost of entry was low, which allowed even the most modest citizens to enjoy bathing. Emperors, aware of their importance, often subsidized expenses or opened access free of charge, reinforcing the bond between power and people. The luxury of marble, statues, and fountains was available to anyone, which made the baths a symbol of social inclusion within a profoundly hierarchical society. But the baths were much more than a hygiene facility. They were a social forum, a place where politics were discussed, business agreements closed, and intrigues woven. Senators and merchants could cross paths in the corridors. Poets recited verses in adjoining libraries. Philosophers debated with young apprentices in the gardens. Business was closed in the hot rooms as much as in the Senate, and friendships were strengthened by sharing the same steam. For many Romans, visiting the baths was the central part of their day, as important as the market or the forum. The baths also reflected the Roman culture of the body. Physical exercise, practiced in the adjoining gyms, was part of the ritual. Romans ran, lifted rudimentary weights, played ball games, and trained in light wrestling. After the activity, the baths served to relax the muscles and clean off sweat, followed by massages with aromatic oils that completed the experience. Body care was not seen as a luxury, but as a necessity linked to the ideal of active and healthy citizenship. Popular life within the baths had a vibrant atmosphere. Street vendors offered sweets and perfumes, musicians animated the halls with melodies, and rumors spread from mouth to mouth with the speed of steam. It was a space where social barriers blurred. A slave could share a pool with a patrician, although status differences did not disappear entirely. Physical and visual contact in a common environment created a sense of community difficult to find in other areas of the city. The architecture of the baths was a display of power and technique. The Romans mastered the use of concrete, which allowed them to build gigantic vaults and open halls of unprecedented dimensions. The baths of Caracalla, inaugurated in 216 AD, covered more than 11 hectares and could accommodate up to 1,600 bathers simultaneously. Monumental columns, polychrome mosaics, and colossal statues decorated the environments, transforming the daily act of bathing into an aesthetic experience. Even the more modest baths, present in almost every city of the empire, reproduced on a smaller scale this architectural grandeur. The supply systems were equally impressive. Aqueducts carried water from distant springs to the city cisterns, from where it was distributed to the baths. The hypocaust, fueled by furnaces that required large amounts of firewood, kept the pools hot and the air warm. Thousands of slaves and workers were dedicated to the maintenance of these complexes, which demonstrates the logistical magnitude involved in offering daily baths to tens of thousands of citizens. The baths were also a space of cultural integration. Travelers, retired soldiers, foreign merchants, and pilgrims shared their customs and stories in the hot halls. The cosmopolitanism of the empire found in the baths a daily meeting point, where diversity mingled around water and steam. It was a reminder that Rome was not only a city, but the center of a vast and plural world. Religion and superstitions. For the Romans, the gods were not distant or abstract beings, but constant presences that intervened in every aspect of existence. The home, the forum, the battlefield, and even political decisions were regulated by rituals that sought to ensure divine favor. Roman religion was less a system of beliefs than a set of practices and obligations. What mattered was not inner faith, but the correct execution of rites that maintained the balance between men and the gods. The Roman pantheon was formed from a fusion of local and foreign traditions. In its origins, Rome worshipped agricultural deities tied to the fertility of the land and the cycle of the seasons. Over time, Etruscan and Greek influence enriched this repertoire. Thus, Mars evolved from being a god of agriculture to becoming the god of war. Jupiter consolidated himself as king of the gods, protector of the state. Juno represented motherhood and civic life, and Minerva symbolized wisdom and the arts. Alongside them coexisted minor deities, tutelary spirits, and foreign gods, absorbed as Rome expanded its frontiers. This capacity for integration was one of the greatest strengths of Roman religion. Admitting new gods meant absorbing new cultures under Rome's dominion. Religious practice was marked by rigorous formalism. Animal sacrifices, wine libations, prayers recited word for word were carried out under the supervision of specialized priests. Any error in the ritual invalidated it and required repetition, for the gods demanded precision rather than devotion. The Roman calendar was full of festivals in honor of various deities, mixing processions, banquets, and public games. Religion, in this sense, was not limited to the temple. It permeated civic life, reinforcing the bond between the community and its protective gods. The role of priests was essential in this structure. The College of Pontiffs, headed by the Pontifex Maximus, ensured the correct observance of rites and the sacred calendar. The augurs interpreted divine signs in the flight of birds or natural phenomena, determining whether a political or military decision had the approval of the gods. The flamines, priests dedicated to a specific god, maintained particular cults. Religion was also a political instrument. Many magistrates held religious offices, and participation in rituals reinforced the prestige and authority of those who presided over them. Superstition coexisted closely with official religion. Romans consulted oracles, observed omens in thunder, in the entrails of sacrificed animals, or in the flight of birds. Dreams were interpreted as divine messages, and amulets against the evil eye were common in every household. This sensitivity to signs revealed a mentality in which nothing was accidental. Every event had a meaning to be deciphered to avoid the gods' wrath or to secure their favor. The border between religion, magic, and superstition was blurred, and both the humblest peasant and the most powerful emperor depended on auguries before making crucial decisions. Among the countless festivals that filled the calendar, none symbolized the Roman spirit better than the Saturnalia. Celebrated in honor of Saturn in December, these feasts marked the end of the agricultural cycle and the arrival of the winter solstice. For several days, the city transformed into a stage of social inversion. Slaves sat at the table as equals to their masters, gifts were exchanged, official activities were suspended, and an atmosphere of freedom and revelry prevailed. The streets filled with music, banquets, and games of chance, and citizens wore festive caps called pileus, a symbol of freedom. The Saturnalia were a safety valve for social tensions, a moment when hierarchies relaxed and the people celebrated abundance and fraternity under Saturn's protection. Roman religion also manifested itself in the domestic sphere. Each family worshipped the Lars and Penates, protective spirits of the home and pantry. Domestic altars, decorated with small statuettes and food offerings, were the spiritual center of family life. The paterfamilias officiated the rituals, ensuring continuity of the bond between the living and their ancestors. At this intimate level, religion merged with daily life. The household fire, guarded by the Vestals in the Temple of Vesta, was reflected in the lamps of every Roman home. Politics and the Senate. The history of Rome cannot be understood without its political life. From its first steps as a small city-state to becoming an empire that ruled over millions of people, Rome's political institutions were the core of its identity. The Senate, the magistracies, and the popular assemblies built a unique model capable of combining aristocratic tradition, civic participation, and military discipline. For centuries, this system was the key to stability, until internal tensions and personal ambitions led to a radical transformation, from an oligarchic republic to an empire centralized in the figure of the emperor. In the early days of the Republic, after the fall of the monarchy in 509 BC, Rome organized a political system based on distrust of absolute power. The figure of the king was replaced by two consuls, elected annually and endowed with the highest executive and military authority. Their shared mandate ensured that neither could accumulate too much power. Alongside them existed a wide range of magistracies: praetors in charge of justice, quaestors responsible for finances, ediles who supervised markets and public works, and censors who compiled the census and oversaw public morality. These offices were held by elected citizens and limited in duration, creating a dynamic balance among the various institutions. The heart of Roman politics was the Senate, an institution that originally had only an advisory role but gradually became the true center of power. Composed of aristocrats and former magistrates, the Senate represented the voice of tradition and experience. Its authority derived not from strict legal mandate but from the prestige and influence of its members. The Senate decided on foreign policy, finances, the granting of provinces, and religious matters. Its strength lay in continuity. While magistracies were temporary, senators served for life, ensuring the stability of the republic. The Roman people also had a voice through the popular assemblies, where citizens voted on laws and elected magistrates. However, the system was structured in such a way that the influence of the upper classes was maintained. In the centuriate assembly, for instance, the vote of the wealthy carried greater weight than that of the poor, thus ensuring that decisions would never stray far from the interests of the elite. Even so, these assemblies provided a space for participation that reinforced the civic identity of Romans and reminded them that the res publica belonged to all. Tensions between patricians and plebeians profoundly marked the political life of the Republic. During the first centuries, the plebeians fought to expand their rights against patrician monopoly. The creation of the tribunate of the plebs in 494 BC was a crucial milestone. The tribunes, elected by the plebeians, had the power of veto over decisions of the Senate or the magistrates, and their persons were considered inviolable. This counterbalance allowed the plebs to defend their interests and force the aristocracy to negotiate. Over time, the plebeians gained access to the consulship, to lawmaking, and to the possibility of marriage with patricians, thereby integrating into the republican nobility. In this way, Roman politics became a game of balances, where competition was expressed through institutional struggles rather than open revolutions. Throughout the centuries, Rome's expansion brought new political challenges. The administration of vast conquered territories, the constant influx of wealth and slaves, and the growing prominence of victorious generals transformed the traditional balance. The Senate found itself overwhelmed by the magnitude of its responsibilities, while the citizens of Italy and the provinces demanded greater integration. The reforms of the Gracchi in the 2nd century BC, which sought to redistribute land and expand rights, triggered violent reactions from the aristocracy. Thus, the Republic revealed its fragility. The rigidity of its institutions could not absorb the social and economic changes of an expanding empire. The army became a decisive factor in politics. The reforms of Marius at the end of the 2nd century BC, which allowed the recruitment of landless soldiers, turned the legions into professional armies loyal not to the state but to their generals. This change irreversibly altered the republican dynamic. Military leaders such as Sulla, Pompey, and Caesar accumulated power that overflowed traditional structures. The civil wars of the 1st century BC were the inevitable outcome of this process, in which the legions decided the fate of the Republic more than the ballot boxes or senatorial debates. The rise of Julius Caesar symbolized the collapse of the republican system. His dictatorship, begun in 49 BC after crossing the Rubicon, showed that personal power could prevail over the old institutions. Caesar's assassination in 44 BC was a desperate attempt to restore the Republic, but in reality it hastened its end. The subsequent wars among his heirs, Octavian, Mark Antony, and Lepidus, culminated in Octavian's victory at the Battle of Actium in 31 BC. With him began the Principate, a new form of government that, while maintaining a republican facade, concentrated power in the figure of the emperor. The Senate survived under the empire, but its role changed radically. Augustus, having become princeps, preserved the republican appearance. He maintained the magistracies, allowed the Senate to continue meeting, and kept the language of tradition. However, the reality was different. The emperor had the final word in all matters, from foreign policy to the appointment of magistrates. The Senate was transformed into an honorary body, useful for legitimizing imperial decisions and maintaining the illusion of institutional continuity. Over time, its real influence diminished even further, becoming a ceremonial assembly where decrees previously decided in the imperial palace were formally approved. Imperial power rested on several pillars: control of the army, centralized administration, and the ability to distribute benefits among the population. The emperor was the supreme commander of the legions, the highest judge, legislator, and high priest as Pontifex Maximus. This accumulation of powers placed him above any institution, even though official rhetoric continued to present him as a primus inter pares, the first among equals. Over time, the imperial figure acquired an almost sacred character, especially under emperors such as Domitian or Diocletian, who reinforced the distance between themselves and the rest of society. The Senate, in that context, limited itself to paying honors, ratifying decisions, and preserving the memory of a system that no longer existed. Politics in the imperial era shifted to the corridors of the palace, where the influence of advisors, freedmen, and members of the imperial family could be decisive. The court replaced the forum as the central stage of power. However, the Senate's prestige remained useful. Many emperors sought to maintain good relations with it, aware that it represented the voice of Roman tradition and aristocracy. Even when its real power was gone, the Senate remained a necessary symbol of continuity. Slavery and freedmen. In Rome, slavery was not a marginal phenomenon, but the invisible foundation upon which much of economic, social, and cultural life rested. From the fields of Italy to the imperial palaces, slaves were present in every corner of the city and the empire. Their numbers became so high that in some periods it is estimated that they represented up to 1/3 of the population. They were conquered in wars, bought in markets, born to enslaved mothers, or condemned for debts and crimes. Without them, Rome would not have been able to feed its cities, maintain its luxury, or expand so quickly. The work of slaves encompassed all areas of Roman life. In the countryside, they cultivated the latifundia that supplied the city with wheat, oil, and wine. In the mines, they extracted precious metals under miserable conditions, with a life expectancy reduced to only a few years. In workshops, they manufactured ceramics, textiles, or weapons. In patrician households, they served as cooks, servants, wet nurses, and tutors. Some slaves, especially Greeks, were educated and cultured, serving as doctors, philosophers, or teachers. Slavery in Rome, therefore, was not limited to manual labor. It could range from the most degrading tasks to functions of great responsibility. Yet they all shared the same legal condition. They were considered property, without rights or autonomy. The treatment of slaves varied according to the era, the master, and the type of work. Some were mercilessly exploited, punished with whips, branding irons, or exhausting labor. Others, however, could live with a certain dignity, receiving a partial wage, the peculium, and accumulating resources to purchase their freedom. The relationship between master and slave was full of contradictions. The slave was an object, but also a person with whom one lived daily. This closeness generated both bonds of trust and latent tensions that sometimes erupted into violence. The fear of rebellion was a constant in the Roman mentality. No episode symbolizes this better than the rebellion of Spartacus, the greatest slave uprising of antiquity. In 73 BC, this Thracian gladiator escaped from a school in Capua with dozens of companions. What began as a flight turned into a massive revolt. Thousands of slaves joined his cause, forming an army that repeatedly defeated Roman forces. For 2 years, Spartacus held the Republic in check, proving that the social structure could tremble. Finally, in 71 BC, he was defeated by Crassus and his legions. The 6,000 prisoners crucified along the Appian Way were the brutal reminder that Rome would not tolerate challenges to its order. The rebellion of Spartacus not only showed the latent strength of the slaves, but also the profound fear Romans harbored of a widespread subversion. Despite the harshness of the system, slavery in Rome offered a possibility of transformation, manumission. A slave who managed to buy his freedom with his peculium was freed by the will of his master, or by testamentary disposition became a freedman. Manumission was so frequent that the authorities had to establish laws to regulate it. Freedmen acquired the condition of free men, although they did not enjoy all the rights of citizens by birth. They remained tied to their former masters through bonds of clientela. They owed loyalty and services to their patrons, who in turn offered them protection. Even so, freedom meant a huge leap in the social scale and the possibility of forging a new destiny. Many freedmen prospered remarkably. Some engaged in commerce and accumulated fortunes that rivaled those of senatorial families. Others reached positions in the imperial administration, especially under emperors who trusted them for their loyalty and their independence from the old aristocracies. Figures such as Narcissus or Pallas, influential freedmen at the court of Claudius, show how far a liberated slave could come to control levers of power. Although despised by the traditional nobility, freedmen became a dynamic intermediate class, a bridge between the servile world and full citizenship. The possibility of social ascent did not end with them. The children of freedmen were already born as Roman citizens with access to full rights. In this way, slavery, though brutal and oppressive, contained within itself a mechanism of social integration. Rome turned the conquered into slaves, but also offered them the possibility of becoming Romans, of merging with the society that had subdued them. This paradox partly explains the empire's ability to absorb such diverse populations and maintain its cohesion for centuries. The cultural view of slavery in Rome was ambivalent. On the one hand, it was considered natural and indispensable. On the other, philosophers reflected on its injustice. Seneca, in his letters, reminded his readers that slaves were human beings and deserved dignified treatment, although he never questioned the system itself. In literature and theatre, slaves appeared as clever, comic, or tragic characters, reflecting their constant presence in Roman life. In epitaphs, some freedmen left proud inscriptions of their new condition, thanking their patrons or celebrating their ascent. Slavery was ultimately a reality so deeply rooted that it permeated all spheres of society. Over time, the massive influx of slaves began to decline. Conquests diminished, and the economy of the late empire increasingly relied on colony tied to the land. an intermediate figure between the slave and the free peasant. The role of women in Rome. Women lived under a system that, in appearance, limited their influence to the margins of private life. Law and tradition placed them in a subordinate position to their father or husband, without political rights or the possibility of holding public office. However, within this apparent invisibility hid a silent power, exercised in the domestic sphere, within family networks, and in exceptional cases in the political and imperial arena. Roman women were guardians of customs, mediators within the family, and, at certain moments, decisive protagonists of history. From a legal point of view, women were subject to male guardianship. In childhood, they depended on the paterfamilias, whose paternal authority extended over all members of the household. Upon marriage, they passed to the control of their husband if the marriage was cum manu, or retained the authority of their family of origin in the sin manu, the more common form in the late Republic. In both cases, women lacked full autonomy. They could not vote, could not be magistrates or senators, and their legal role was limited. Nevertheless, these restrictions did not prevent them from finding ways to act in social and economic life. The household was the center of their influence. The Roman matron, the legitimate wife of a citizen, represented the honor and dignity of the family. She was responsible for domestic administration, supervision of slaves and servants, and the early education of children. Traditional morality exalted virtues such as chastity, fidelity, and industry. That is, dedication to work. A virtuous woman was a symbol of prestige for her husband, and her conduct affected the reputation of the entire family. Funerary inscriptions abound with praise for matrons who spun wool and cared for the household, a reflection of the Roman feminine ideal. Nevertheless, the reach of Roman women went beyond the domestic sphere. In the economic realm, they could manage their dowries, own property, and run businesses, especially in sine manu marriages, where they retained assets inherited from their families. Some became moneylenders, merchants, or workshop owners. Enriched freedwomen in particular found in commerce a path to social ascent. Although the law did not grant them a voice in politics, wealth and family connections gave many women an indirect but significant power. The role of women was also manifest in religion. The Vestals, priestesses entrusted with guarding the sacred fire of Vesta, enjoyed a unique status. They were inviolable, held legal privileges, and could intervene in public ceremonies of great importance. Their symbolic purity guaranteed the security of the state, and failure in their duties was punished with death. This sacred role shows how, in a male-dominated world, there were spaces of power reserved exclusively for women. Literary sources and historical accounts also highlight cases of powerful women who transcended the private sphere. Cornelia, mother of the Gracchi, was renowned for her refined education and for instilling in her sons a passion for political reform, marking a key moment in Republican history. Livia Drusilla, wife of Augustus, was an influential figure in the Principate, advisor to her husband, mediator in dynastic intrigues, and a symbol of public virtue. She consolidated the image of the imperial family. Agrippina the Younger, mother of Nero, went even further. She actively participated in government, controlled the court, and exercised a power that aroused fears and criticism among the male elite. Her downfall and assassination show how far female ambition could be perceived as dangerous in a system designed to exclude them. The world of humble women was different, though also essential. In the insulae, they shared the hardships of urban life, working in workshops, selling in markets, raising children in difficult conditions. Many enslaved women lived subject to the whims of their masters, used as servants, concubines, or wet nurses, yet they too could aspire to freedom through manumission and, in some cases, achieve a better future as freed women. The spectrum of female conditions in Rome was as broad as Roman society itself, from the noble matron surrounded by luxuries to the anonymous slave in a dark workshop. Roman literature offers an ambiguous testimony about women. Poets such as Ovid exalted seduction and amorous play, while Cicero and other moralists defended the austere model of the faithful and discreet wife. The female figure oscillated between the inspiring muse and the threat to social stability, between idealization and suspicion. In men's discourse, women were reflections of collective virtues or vices, never fully independent actors. Even so, the sheer abundance of references demonstrates that their presence, though politically denied, was central to cultural life. Roman women also played a role in rituals of death and memory. They were the main ones in charge of funerals, of publicly mourning the deceased, and of maintaining domestic cults to the ancestors. In doing so, they became guardians of family continuity, ensuring that the memory of the dead lived on in future generations. Their role in this sphere reinforced the idea that, although marginalized from politics, they were indispensable for the transmission of tradition. Architecture and engineering. Rome not only conquered territories with its legions, it also united them with stone, concrete, and straight lines. Wherever the imperial eagles arrived, aqueducts were raised, roads were laid, amphitheaters were built, and cities were planned to replicate the model of the capital. Roman architecture and engineering were tools of domination and symbols of civilization, a tangible manifestation of Rome's power that even today, centuries after the fall of the empire, still stands as testimony to its greatness. The aqueduct was one of the most impressive achievements of Roman engineering. Designed to supply water to cities, aqueducts could run for dozens of kilometers from springs and rivers to urban centers. Their functioning was based on a simple principle: gravity. Through covered channels and monumental arches, water flowed constantly, feeding public fountains, baths, private houses, and sewer systems. Work such as the Aqueduct of Segovia in Hispania or the Aqua Claudia in Rome demonstrate not only technical precision, but also the aesthetic ambition of Roman engineers. These stone arches, perfectly fitted without mortar, defied time and turned a practical necessity into a monument of power. Running water, which we consider ordinary today, was in antiquity a luxury that Rome offered its citizens as a symbol of its superiority. Roman roads were the skeleton of the empire. Built with successive layers of stone, gravel, and compacted sand, they achieved a durability that still astonishes. Their straight layout, solid foundations, and efficient drainage allowed legions to move quickly across thousands of kilometers. Phrases such as "all roads lead to Rome" are not mere metaphors. The Roman road system, with more than 80,000 kilometers, connected distant provinces such as Britain, Hispania, and Syria with the heart of the empire. Roads were not only military corridors, they encouraged trade, the circulation of information, and cultural integration. Along these routes, mansiones or state inns were established, offering rest and supplies to travelers and messengers. Each stone of the Roman roads was a promise of order and domination, uniting under one horizon territories that had once been fragmented. Amphitheaters represented another facet of Roman architectural greatness. The Colosseum in Rome, with capacity for 50,000 spectators, is the most famous example, but not the only one. From North Africa to Gaul, every major city had its own amphitheater, a smaller replica of the imperial model. Built in stone and concrete, with concentric seating and access systems that allowed rapid entry and exit of crowds, these spaces were perfect machines for spectacle. In their arenas, gladiators fought, wild beast hunts were staged, and naval battles were reenacted through complex flooding systems. Architecture was not limited to function. It conveyed a political message. Each amphitheater was a reminder of Rome's power, of its control over violence, and of its ability to provide the people with bread and circuses in a monumental setting. Roman urban planning transformed the landscape of conquered provinces. Colonies were founded following a regular pattern. Two main streets, the Cardo and the Decumanus, crossed at right angles in the center where the Forum was located. Around it were distributed temples, baths, markets, and theaters, replicating the organization of Rome in miniature. This urban model guaranteed not only functional efficiency but also a sense of shared identity. Anyone walking through the streets of a colony in Gaul or North Africa immediately recognized the imprint of Rome. It was a reminder that beyond cultural and linguistic borders, all were part of the same order. The secret of this monumental display was Roman concrete. A mixture of lime, water, volcanic sand, and stones, it allowed the construction of structures more resistant and versatile than cut stone. With it, the Romans raised gigantic domes such as that of the Pantheon, which, with its 43-meter diameter, remains a marvel of engineering. Concrete also enabled the creation of bridges, ports, and sewer systems that pushed the technical limits of their time. This material, cheap and durable, democratized monumentality. It allowed even provincial cities to have works of quality comparable to those of the capital. Military engineering was another fundamental aspect. Legions did not only fight, they also built. Each camp was designed like a miniature city: walls, moats, gates, straight streets, and a central space for command. These camps, organized with geometric precision, often became the seed of new cities. In addition, soldiers erected fortifications, wooden or stone bridges, and siege machines such as catapults and mobile towers. The ability to build in the midst of a campaign was one of the strategic advantages that allowed Rome to prevail over its enemies. Engineering was not a luxury, it was part of the military arsenal. Public space in Rome reflected the same monumental vocation. Forums, centers of political and social life, were adorned with basilicas, temples, and triumphal arches. Each emperor sought to leave his mark through grand constructions: the Forum of Caesar, that of Augustus, that of Trajan. The triumphal arch celebrated military victories and projected imperial glory in stone. Basilicas, covered spaces for commercial transactions and trials, anticipated the form of later Christian temples. The city became a stage where architecture narrated the story of power. Leisure and welfare infrastructure was also a priority. The baths, such as those of Caracalla and Diocletian, were true cities within the city, with bath halls, gyms, gardens, and libraries. The semicircular theatres, such as that of Marcellus in Rome or that of Merida in Hispania, hosted dramatic and musical performances. These constructions showed that the empire not only offered security and order, but also culture and shared pleasure. Engineering and architecture were not limited to utility. They were meant to impress, persuade, and seduce. Even the sewer system was a work worthy of admiration. The Cloaca Maxima, originally built in the Etruscan period and expanded by the Romans, channeled the city's wastewater into the Tiber. This sanitation system, together with aqueducts and public fountains, made Rome a relatively healthy city for its size, far ahead of other ancient cities. The control of water, both clean and waste, was proof of the practical ingenuity of Roman engineers. With these works, Rome not only facilitated the daily life of its citizens, it imposed a political discourse in stone. Each aqueduct reminded of the generosity of the emperor who financed it. Each road spoke of the unity of the empire. Each amphitheater reinforced authority through spectacle. Each triumphal arch narrated a military victory. Architecture and engineering were propaganda, material symbols of the eternity of Rome. The legacy of Rome. The Roman Empire fell centuries ago, but its traces remain present in the daily lives of millions of people. Few civilizations have left such a lasting imprint on the culture, politics, law, urbanism, and language of the West. Rome did not disappear with the fall of its walls in 476 AD. It was transformed into heritage, tradition, and model, capable of crossing centuries and shaping the modern world. From the words we speak to the laws that govern states, from the cities we inhabit to the ideas of citizenship and power, Rome continues to live on in forms sometimes evident and sometimes invisible. Latin, the language of Rome, is the root of many modern languages. From it were born the Romance languages: Spanish, French, Italian, Portuguese, Romanian, Catalan, Galician. Its grammatical structure, vocabulary, and rhythm are present in the daily lives of millions of speakers. Even in non-Romance languages such as English or German, there are countless words of Latin origin, either inherited directly or introduced through scholarly tradition during the Renaissance and Middle Ages. Latin remained the language of the Catholic Church, diplomacy, science, and law for centuries, becoming the bridge that connected the ancient and modern worlds. Its permanence was no accident. Its precision, its ability to express abstract concepts, and its cultural prestige made it a vehicle of knowledge and authority. Roman law is perhaps the most solid and tangible legacy. Roman jurists, from the Republic to the Empire, developed legal principles that still underpin the judicial systems of Europe and the Americas today. Concepts such as property, contract, will, inheritance, legal person, usufruct, and servitude are part of the modern legal vocabulary and come directly from the Roman legal corpus. The Law of the 12 Tables, written in the 5th century BC, laid the foundations of formal equality among citizens, while later compilations such as Justinian's Corpus Juris Civilis in the 6th century AD consolidated a legal body that became a fundamental reference for medieval and Renaissance law. The notion that laws must be written and accessible, and that the power of the state must be exercised according to legal norms, are principles Rome bequeathed to the Western world. The idea of citizenship was another decisive contribution. In Rome, being a citizen meant belonging to a community of rights and duties, protected by law and obligated to serve the state. Over time, citizenship was extended to conquered peoples, integrating millions under a common political identity. This concept survived the fall of the empire and became a model for modern states, where citizenship remains the basis of belonging and participation. Rome taught that power is not only military domination, but also the integration of diverse communities under a common legal framework. In architecture and urbanism, Rome left a profound mark. Today's European cities preserve the Roman layout: straight streets, central squares, forums transformed into main squares. Monuments such as aqueducts, bridges, and theatres still stand in cities such as Segovia, Arles, Verona, or Merida, integrated into contemporary urban life. The technique of the arch, the vault, and the dome was adopted by medieval and Renaissance architecture, and the use of concrete, rediscovered centuries later, became the basis of modern construction. The Roman ideal of the city as an orderly, functional, and monumental space continues to influence urban planning, from Washington to Paris. The Roman political model also left an indelible mark. The Republic, with its system of magistracies, senate, and assemblies, inspired thinkers and politicians of the Renaissance and Enlightenment. The separation of powers, the rotation of offices, and the temporal limits of mandates are concepts that the founders of the United States and modern democracies took directly from Rome. Although the empire represented the concentration of power in a single figure, the Roman Republic served as an example of balance between institutions and citizenship. The very term Senate, derived from senex, elder, still designates legislative chambers in the modern world. Roman customs also transcended their time. The Julian calendar, instituted by Julius Caesar in 46 BC, was the basis of the Gregorian calendar we use today. The names of the months, religious festivities transformed into Christian celebrations, and the 7-day week all have Roman roots. Practices such as public baths, mass spectacles, or the organization of popular festivals survived in different forms in medieval and modern Europe. Even the European table inherited Roman influence. The consumption of wine, oil, and bread as staple foods comes directly from the Roman Mediterranean diet. Roman literature contributed to shaping the Western canon. Virgil, Horace, Ovid, Cicero, Seneca, Tacitus, and Juvenal were not only authors of their time. Their works shaped the way Europe understood politics, poetry, philosophy, and history. The Middle Ages preserved these texts in monasteries, and the Renaissance recovered them as sources of inspiration. Cicero's rhetoric became the model for political speeches, while Seneca's Stoic philosophy influenced later ethical schools. The tradition of writing history as moral reflection, cultivated by Livy or Tacitus, marked the path of modern historiography. Christianity, born on the margins of the empire, expanded thanks to Roman infrastructure and organization. Roads, cities, and administrative networks facilitated the spread of the new faith, which eventually became the official religion under Constantine and Theodosius. Christianity inherited from Rome its hierarchical structure, its Latin language, and its sense of universality. Thus, even in the spiritual realm, Rome survived in the Church, which proclaimed itself heir to its moral and cultural authority. Law, language, politics, architecture, and religion were not the only legacies. Rome also transmitted an imaginary of power, a model of civilization that served as reference and aspiration. The medieval emperors of the Holy Roman Empire, the popes in Rome, Renaissance monarchs, and modern revolutionaries often presented themselves as continuators of Roman tradition. The word empire still carries the resonance of Rome, and the idea of Western civilization has at its core the Roman heritage. Even in the contemporary world, Rome remains present in popular culture. Films, novels, and television series evoke its gladiators, emperors, and legions. The Colosseum is a universal symbol of the power of spectacle, and the figure of Caesar continues to be synonymous with ambition and glory. Roman symbols such as the eagle or the fasces were adopted by modern states in their political iconography. The very idea of civilization, as opposed to barbarism, comes from the Roman mentality, which saw itself as the bearer of order against external chaos. Rome was not eternal in politics, but it was in culture. Its legacy multiplied in every Romance language, in every legal code, in every stone arch still standing over modern cities. We live surrounded by its shadow, sometimes consciously, sometimes unconsciously. Rome did not die. It dissolved into the world that came after, leaving a heritage that still today shapes the way we speak, think, organize our cities, and conceive of justice.